After over 2,000 American deaths at Pearl Harbor, General Yamamoto said, "I am afraid I have awoken the sleeping giant of America." This general was definitely right. The attack of Pearl Harbor was horrific, but later awoke the sleeping heart of America. Because of the Japanese takeover of Southeast Asia, the attack of Pearl Harbor happened. The attack was devastating for the naval base because we lost so many people and ships. However, it turned out to be okay for the country because it motivated us to win the war and brought us into a wartime economy. In the 19th and early 20th century, America was a huge imperialist power. America took over islands in the Pacific such as the Philippines. By the 1930s, Japan was also craving new land and power, so they started to try to take over Southeast Asia and expand. This started the rivalry between the US and Japan in World War II. As Japan tried to take over land in Asia, they started to wage war with China. They wanted all the natural resources that China had. The US and China were allies, therefore, this invasion of China made the US very uncomfortable. In 1937 and 1938, the US demanded that Japan stop invading. After the Japanese refused in the spring of 1941, the US placed an embargo on Japan. There was to be no trading with Japan. The U.S. also wouldn't give them any of the supplies they used to give them, such as steel, scrap iron, fuel, and oil. This seriously weakened Japan's army and navy, leading to infuriated Japanese leaders. Towards the end of 1941, Japan and the U.S. tried to find peace between them since they thought that war was growing, but they just couldn't find a settlement. Knowing that war was on the horizon, the Japanese knew they had to do something to weaken the powerful U.S. Navy. They thought of the choice to destroy Pearl Harbor. This would get rid of the serious naval threat there and give Japan some breathing room in the Pacific. Roosevelt made a final appeal for peace from the Japanese, but there was no reply. Japan knew it was the perfect time to strike. Japan's goal was to develop a sneak attack that would leave the U.S. Navy in pieces. They were hoping that they could go into the war and win it before the United States Navy could recover from their attack. On December 7, 1941, the United States and Japan were in a meeting discussing war. 6 aircraft carriers took 423 Japanese planes across the Pacific towards Pearl Harbor. The first wave of 183 planes left at 6 in the morning from the carriers. The second wave of 167 planes left at 7:15 in the morning. The horrific bombings lasted for nearly 2 hours in Pearl Harbor. There were 8 major battleships damaged, including 5 that were sunken. The USS Arizona took the most damage that day. 188 aircrafts were lost during the bombing raid as well. Not only were their materials lost, but people lost their lives too. There were 2,335 servicemen killed, along with 68 civilians. The casualties totaled around 3,500, because another 1,178 soldiers were injured. After this attack on Pearl Harbor, it seemed like the Japanese had succeeded. They had left the Navy with nearly nothing. The Navy was tiny and vulnerable after this attack happened. However, this attack was not a success because the Navy's own aircraft carriers were not in Pearl Harbor the day, so they were not affected. These carriers would later become very important in the war. Since the Navy was also down 3,000 men, they would need serious help in finishing the war. The Japanese government thought that they could keep expanding now that they had taken out their most dangerous threat in the Pacific. The Japanese felt like they had all the power in the Pacific, and the U.S. wouldn't be bothersome for 1 to 2 years. Yet, the American public would not stand for this. They turned this attack around and made the most shocking and quickest recovery from this brutal attack. The U.S. rallied like never before and made this attack not seem as bad as it really was. The attack on Pearl Harbor would do something to America that wasn't done in years. On December 8, 1941, Franklin Roosevelt went to Congress and asked to declare war. This would bring the U.S. and its people into the war. The people of the U.S. were excited to go to war and get back at the Japanese. Congress looked over it and accepted the war request a few days after. The attack pulled the country and people back together as one uniting group. They want to avenge this attack, so they want to rebuild their navy and become a great enough force to beat Japan. The attack also brought America's economy back. Before the attack, the people in the American economy were struggling. They now transitioned into a wartime economy. This meant that they were producing more food and more supplies for soldiers. They were sending and receiving supplies from the Allies now that they were involved in warfare. With all this new stuff needing to be made, it created new job opportunities for people. So, even though Pearl Harbor was initially a horrible attack, it did a lot of good things for the country, including getting us into a wartime economy and eventually winning the war. Overall, the attack on Pearl Harbor turned out to help the Americans, even though so many lives were lost. This devastating attack all happened because of an invasion of Southeast Asia. Pearl Harbor was a horrific attack that would go down in American history. It also brought a lot of good and bad results, including a horrific end to a war in history.